know Carla has a number of questions that people have been asking, and so I'm going to turn it over to you, Carla, to be able to address some of those with the panel.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, and thank you to the panelists. I just want to throw something out before I forget. If any of you would be willing to hear directly from members of the audience, if you could add your email address to the chat box, I think that might be appreciated. I know that there's no way I'm going to get through all the questions that were submitted in the next 15 minutes, but perhaps if there's something specific you could help somebody with on an individual basis, that would be appreciated. Several people wrote and asked what advice you would give to university career centers as they advise international students seeking employment.
I'll take that. I think the big thing is to be very careful as far as there's very strict time frames as far as when to apply for OPT, STEM OPT, to make sure you're staying in line with those, and also any reporting requirements to make sure that you are updating anything with the school that you need to be updating, because that can all come down to affecting your status if there are any changes that you haven't reported.
And I'll just add too that a lot of times OPT jobs are getting delayed, and so students have to be keeping in mind the 90-day unemployment limits, and so needing to find something or anything in order not to have that clock get to the 90-day mark, and to be, again, as Julie said, in touch with the school to make sure you're in compliance and not going to be falling out of status.
Mm-hmm.
Great. This is sort of a follow-up on that. If a student cannot identify an OPD arrangement after graduation, especially this spring because of the pandemic, can the student later come back to the United States and continue their training?
So the OPT is authorized by the school for the 1 year post-graduation, and so then they're only allowed to have that OPT for that 1 year period. Unfortunately, that's not going to be then able to be recovered if they don't use it up within the year they're authorized by the school.
Okay. And then another OPT question. Apparently there are rumors that OPT would be canceled for 2 years. Is that right? Have any of you heard that, or can you address
that falls right under the rumor category. And so the way that OPT works is it's by regulation. And so unlike these other presidential proclamations that can limit entry of people into the US without going through any additional process, OPT, which is by regulation, has to be published in the what's called the Federal Register in order for any changes to take effect. And if they do that, the normal procedure is to go through a notice and comment period where they have to then justify why this regulatory change is being made, and also that there's no harmful economic outcome because of the change in the regulation. So there's a lot of hoops the government does have to go through in order to make these changes. Now, having said that, one of the things that this administration is looking into is the ability to do what's called an interim final regulation with an emergency, a national emergency component that allows the regulation to take effect upon publishing without going through the normal notice and comment period. And so that's the thing that really is concerning a lot of us, is that if they try to invoke that exception and then say publish a regulation to put a halt on OPT of some kind and to have it take effect immediately, then the only recourse is to go into court and to try to stop that from happening. And then it's up to the judge to decide whether they're going to allow that regulation to be in effect while the court case goes on or not. And that's really going to then determine what happens going forward. So I guess it's partially rumor, partially legal issue, and we're going to have to wait and see what this administration tries to do. That is, however, one of the issues that a bunch of senators, a large group of senators from both parties, did do a bipartisan letter to this administration urging them not to mess with OPT.
Okay. Lauren, I had one question came in directly for you. As a recruiter, what fears or what issues do you have to deal with when you're working with international clients?
Yeah, well, so for me, there's a few things. One is just the timing in terms of trying, for people on OPT, for example, trying to make sure that that we're aware of how long they have it for, and also if they started it, they just graduated, how long they have left, so we can try to be as efficient as possible in terms of shepherding people through the interview and hopefully offer a process. The other thing I always counsel the talent on is making sure they have paperwork, making sure that they have everything together, because whether it's an H-1B visa, whether it's an O visa, whether it's something else, it's up to the individual to provide a ton of documentation, and they need to be aware of what all of those things are, so that way things aren't slowed up because of lack of those. And I'm sure people on the panel can talk a lot more about, you know, all of that, but you know, those are two of the main things. And also just making sure that people are being in constant contact, so that way the communication side is continuing, so people know where everyone stands.
And if I could add, just in terms of overall recruitment of interns and growing young professionals coming out of academic settings, I think we've seen certainly a short-term chilling of the internship opportunities. And I could speak for, you know, my company, but I've noticed this in other companies, especially on the research scientific front, engineering front. We have a large contingent of our company that is lab-based. And when you have to have restrictions on how many people you can have in the lab at a time, we're first and foremost trying to onboard new employees, full-time employees. And so the thought of focusing on internship programs has added a level of complexity that we weren't prepared for, and I don't think anybody else was. I honestly believe that's a short-term problem. I think it's the opportunities to continue to build your pipeline, leveraging, you know, top-level students coming out of academia. I mean, I honestly think we're going to have to find new innovative ways to commit to that, including leveraging the various visa status that we have. So I guess it's a way to give some hope that we understand the value in growing an early stage pipeline of talent with organization. It can't be a long-term solution.
Thank you for that. Another question was, what will happen to J1 holders who are unable to return to their home countries because of travel restrictions? They need to go back to the countries to renew their visa. So do you have any advice for people in that category?
I can start that one. One of the things that one of the agencies I've been actually pretty impressed with is the Department of State, which administers J1s. And on their website, they have a whole resource center for people that are in this situation. What they advise is first contacting the visa sponsor, then reaching out to the embassy or consulate I should say the embassy, so the country's embassy that's in Washington. They've actually been helpful to get some people home. There are certain lists to get onto and different types of ways to get onto various charter flights that are flying out for various J1 holders. The other thing to know is that you can always apply to change your status online to that of a tourist visa, which would show, just by filing, frankly, shows that you're trying. But I would minimally suggest doing that if all else fails, so that you don't hurt yourself in the future.
Great. And all right. Another question was, someone was looking for a comment on states that are an at-will state. Must an employer submit a labor condition if they lay off an international individual from an at-will state?
So, so the labor condition application is not state specific, it's federal. And so to get any H-1B worker, the employer must file a labor condition application and have it certified by the Department of Labor. And that is not state specific, that is not at will employment specific, that is every single H-1B. And so any of these changes that I talked about before, or all of the compliance, is federal and across the board, and there are no exceptions to that for certain states or for certain employment arrangements.
Great. All right, another question. Can you provide some thoughts on the TN1? Is this a better alternative for companies? And how strictly does an employer have to describe the scope of work?
I can take that one. I think the TN is generally a very good option for jobs that are on the NAFTA list. So there are certain occupations under NAFTA that you can do a TN for if you're a Canadian citizen or Mexican citizen. Canadians don't need visas, so it could be a very straightforward process. There are certain jobs that are not as great as they used to be, but in the biotech industry, there's a whole realm of biologists, chemists that will fit that and are a good fit if they're doing that hands-on work. I think one of the issues we're seeing now is with the border closure. We've had a lot of inconsistency on what we're seeing as far as who is able to enter. So the border closure proclamation was not supposed to hinder trade. If you had a work visa, you were supposed to be able to enter. That being said, we are seeing people that tried to come over and were told they can't because they're not an essential worker, or their office was remote, so they could have done the job from Canada. Different ports of entry. I think Bennett and Keith and I all sat in on this AILA Town, which is our immigration bar, town hall meeting about this, and people's experiences were so inconsistent across the board. Even different ports were doing different things. Some were adjudicating all TN, some were only allowing an essential worker. Some would depend on who's the officer that you met with. Some were allowing the TN worker in, but not the spouse. So I'm hoping as things start to loosen, things get better with that. But it's definitely still a good option. I've heard better luck with if you're flying, it's easier to get through. That being said, sometimes some of the airports, just even pre-COVID, are difficult to get through. But it is still a very good option, I think, especially for a lot of the jobs that your companies are going to be filing for.
Yeah, and I guess let me just add two things to that. On top of the border restrictions that are in place, there's also some quarantine issues, especially going between Canada and the US, that people need to be aware of. And so even if you are an essential worker and able to enter on the TN, you might be subject to a 14-day quarantine in either direction, so you have to be careful about that. But the other thing I will add is that the TN is a great option for somebody who's in the US now that we have premium processing back available, because a TN does not have to be filed at a port of entry or at the US Embassy in Canada. It can be filed through the Immigration Service, and with premium processing available, we have the ability to do TNs for folks who are here. And I've never filed more TNs in the US than I have during COVID, so people don't have to travel. So that's a really good option to take advantage of as well.
Great. I'm going to ask two questions as one, that kind of two sides of the same coin. One person submitted that Forbes reported recently that there's a plan to only grant H-1B visas to highest earning positions, basically people earning more than $150,000 a year. And then the other question I want to end with is, how will all these changes affect international workers who are not that privileged, who do not have advanced degrees or would be in the high income category?
So I can address that Forbes thing first, because I know the guy who writes those Forbes articles, and basically what his purpose is of writing most of those articles is to rally support, and one of those articles led to these senators banding together and writing one of those letters to the administration, and so that is squarely a rumor, and that came out of the potential for the next proclamation to bar entry for certain H-1B workers based on their salary or certain other things, not to ban other H-1Bs. Because again, the barring of the entry is allowed by presidential proclamation. The restrictions on H-1Bs in general is not. That requires a regulatory or statutory change. And certainly that would be something that would not be allowed to go into effect immediately, because that would be a significant legal change to the whole H-1B structure. So that was floated out there as one of those rumors in terms of trying to keep certain people out of the US. And then that was turned into a rallying cry for all the people who are sitting on the sidelines and not lobbying in order to tell the administration how crucial these workers were, which did lead to some positive lobbying, which again has led to a delay in the next proclamation.
Great, thank you. And I think we could go on for a long time, but unfortunately we just have 1 minute left. Does anybody want to touch on the effects that these changes are having on perhaps the less privileged international workers, those without the advanced degrees?
I mean, right now nothing's changed. It's all rumors. I think that, and it's funny, in some ways there's a lot of calls for visas that are for unskilled labor to stay. For example, like they've been adding allowances for farm workers because of the farm work shortage. So I think from my side, and I'm going to kind of piggyback off of something Mike said a lot earlier, to me, there's a more practical element here, which is that the morale and the confidence of foreign nationals here with this almost feeling like it's just over their heads is just so hard right now. And so one thing we've been telling our clients is just making sure they're checking in with their foreign nationals to make sure they're okay. Because we could literally talk for hours on end about all of the rumors going on, but at the end of the day, all they are is rumors. And frankly, I think the Trump administration wants this to happen. I think they want people to be scared. So I think the practical element right now is that in reality, nothing has changed. Other than that people are absolutely shaken, both that are foreign nationals, that are friends with foreign nationals, and that people that employ them.
All
Great,
right.
thank you. Thanks, Carla. And I want to thank Lauren and our awesome panel. You guys are so knowledgeable